Good afternoon. This next video is to show the process to creating an assembly drawing within the scope of the drafting template within Solid Edge. What we will do is we will create an assembly view. We will then add our parts list and also add our balloons. After we've done that, we will explore the various components of an assembly drawing, in particular how we adjust the balloons, and then also how we adjust the parts list. So let's start. Okay, we will start by going into the same inches drafting. Okay, I will now bring in an assembly. So I'm going to go into my Home tab. I'm going to go into my View Wizard. Within the View Wizard, I'm going to bring in a specific assembly. It's a small assembly, but it will allow us to see how we actually put in all of our elements. So I'm going to just go into my folder right here. Okay. And when we come into the dialog box for selecting our model, here, as you can see, we only have all of the parts. In order to see all the in order to see the assembly, we're just going to go down here to the file types, click the down arrow. Now, if it's just simply the assemblies that we want to see, we're going to change it to assembly documents right there. If we want to see the parts as well as the assemblies, just pick the very last choice, which is right there. Okay, for our case, I'll just limit it to the assembly, and I'm going to select the single throw clamp, which is right there. Click open, bring it in. The default that it comes in as is an isometric. We actually want a full front view, so we will go into our wizard layout in the dialog box. We are going to select the front as our primary view, and that's really all the view that we need. We don't actually, in this particular instance, we won't be needing a right view or a top view. The front view is all we need. I'm going to click OK. 2 is the one seems to be more inadequate for this particular view. Let's click, and then we'll hit escape, and now we have our view. So here's our view. I'm going to now place the parts list. So the parts list is located here in tables. So with parts list, we can go into parts list. Before actually we go into parts lists, let's take a look at the annotation. And right below our callouts, we have the balloons. If I click on balloons, so with balloons, we are able to then go into our balloon properties to change a few things. We can change the balloon shape, so the shape that we want. So there's various shapes that we are allowed to use. We can also have a balloon that has no shape to it at all. The balloon height, so right now it's set to 2. We can change that to increase or decrease the size. We can add prefixes, suffixes, upper and lower limits, property text. There's lots that we can do here. We can also change the leaders. The leaders are pretty much set to the same categories that we would use for our callouts or our leaders themselves. Smart depth. Smart depth is to indicate any additional symbology that we require. So for our purposes here, that's fine. Now we can associate the balloons to our parts list, which is right there, which it usually is set. We can contribute it through the item number, item count. We can stack the balloons, so on and so forth. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to use the parts list to bring all of this in together. So I'm going to click on parts list. Okay, with parts list, it automatically links balloons to the parts list itself. So I'm going to select my view. Okay, and as you can see, balloons and the parts list are now active, and that means that they're both listed. I'm going to go into my properties first. Okay, and in my properties, I am going to go through a few of these tabs just to show what we have. So in the data, this is what we will end up having in our parts list. I'm just going to go into balloons. For the balloons themselves, we will indicate what the text is. So we'll change the text to say 0.3. That's the height in the font, so that's the text size. The shape, we'll keep it at the circle. But what I want is to make a change here. So it says use item number for the upper text and use item count for the lower text. Because the item count indicates how many objects are for that particular balloon are being used, this actually causes duplication. So unless it's actually required, what I usually do is I just turn that off and then just leave the item number is the only thing that's in the balloon. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to find a convenient location to place my parts list, click, and now I have my parts list and my balloons. So take a look, the balloons are all set and they're all placed in conjunction to where they're supposed to be. I'm going to hit escape. I'm just going to drag my view up a little bit, and as you can see, the balloons themselves are tagged or connected together. Now the balloons are placed in they're arranged in such a way that we can independently or move them around. However, if you take a look, there is what's known as an alignment shape that allows all the balloons to align together. So if I was to go up to annotation, at the extreme right-hand side, I have two particular buttons. This one produces an alignment shape, which is that dotted line, and this one actually hides the alignment shape that exists. So if I click on this one right here, it brings up the alignment shape. Now what does the alignment shape do? It allows me to do a few things. If I click on it, you can see that there's a bunch of blue nodes and also the dashed line. If I was to click on this blue node and then move it, it actually increases or decreases sequentially in the size, and also moves the balloons in sequence. If I select the bar, however, and then drag it, it moves as one unit to reposition as required. It doesn't scale it, it just repositions it. Okay? So I'm just going to position it back here. If I wanted to, say, for example, reposition this on its own, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Alt, I'm going to pick, and drag, and then I can drag this out of the way. So now I can move the balloon independently of each other by just holding Alt, and if I want to reattach, just left click, drag, and then it will re-snap once it gets close to the edge. So the Alt key will be used if we want to reposition it. So hold Alt again, select, and then we can pretty much move the balloon out of alignment, and then just simply grab the balloon, drag it, and it will snap into position. Another nice thing that we can do is we can give the balloons their own spacing. So for example, if I grab the 9 and then drag it towards the 8, it's going to shift the 8 out of the way, and then I can drag and I can reposition the 9. Same thing over here with the 5 and the 2. Push down on the, say, 2, hold the left mouse button, drag, and it will shift the 5, and then I can move the 2. Okay? Now, if I wanted to put the 2 on the opposite side, and once again, hold Alt, click, drag, and then I can place it on the opposite side of the 5, and then just drag and then drop it, and have it snap back on in line. So by doing it that way now, I can simply arrange those balloons in a much more clear and much more sequential way. So same here, I'll move this out of the way. Okay, so now when we're satisfied with how the balloons are placed, all we need to do is just simply click on the show and hide, and it will close the alignment. Okay, let's take a look at the parts list. The parts list, when we zoom into it, okay, so the parts list, when we double click, what it'll do is it'll activate that parts list. And by doing it that way, we are also able to do some really nice little things. For example, we can adjust the sizes. So just by dragging that, So we can adjust that. This column right here indicates my name, and I don't really need that column. I want to remove that column, and I want to actually add other columns. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply double click, and on there, actually, do this one more time. So select, and then let's go to properties. So within properties, okay, now I can go into, say, my data, and here's all of the data that is populating. And as I said before, I don't need the authors tab. So there's a couple of ways I can change this. I can select it and go right mouse button or delete the column, or I can go into columns right here, and then I can select author from here and say delete column, and it does the exact same thing. Either way, here it's much more visual, so I'm able to delete that column, whereas here if I wanted to add additional columns, I can do it. So up until here, I'm just going to add that. Okay, I'm going to hit apply, and as you can see here, the parts list automatically changes. If I wanted to add some additional columns right now, so right now I've got my file, I have my quantity. Let's say between the quantity and the file name itself, what I'd like to do is I'd like to add, say, the material. So in between there, I'd like to add the material. So I will not be able to do it in the data display. I'm going to have to go into the column tab. On the column tab, right below here where it says properties, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to look for material. There's material. I'm going to select material, and then I'm going to say add column. Okay, add column, it adds it to the end. Now, I don't want it at the end. I actually want it in between file and quantity. So all I'm going to do is right above add column, it says move up. As long as that's highlighted, I can just click on the move up, and it'll bring it into position. When I click apply, it adds that column, as you can see. Okay, so we have that. Let's add another column. We're going to add a weight. So the weight is going to be right next to quantity. So I'm going to highlight quantity so that it's going to add it there. Let's scroll down. Here is my mass item, which is what I'd like. Mass quantity, what it does is it calculates the total weight of all of the parts depending on what the quantity is. So if I have 2, if it knows what 1 weighs, it's going to multiply it by 2. Here it's going to multiply 4, so on and so forth. So I'm going to add just simply, and I am going to click on the item. So I'm going to click on the item. So mass item, let's add the column. Okay, I'm going to leave it to where it is. I'm just going to hit OK, and it adds that. Okay, so now I can just move this in position. There's a lot of white space behind here, so I'm going to hit escape, and as always, just double click and then just drag this in so I can give it a little bit more. Okay, so let's take a look at the output here. For the mass, it's giving us weights, but mysteriously here we've got some of the callouts that are giving us 0 weight. Okay, 0 weight simply means that there's no material assigned to it. So if we take a look right here, we've got a hex head, we have the nut, and we have the the shorter hex head that have no material assigned to it. Okay, so in order to place that, we have to pretty much assign that material. Now, if I click and go into properties, and let's say I go into, where is it? Sort, groups, options, item numbers. Okay, so right about here, we can type in the material if we know it. In this particular instance, it's the heads that we need to apply. So let's see here. We have the hex head, right mouse button. So that hex head also indicates where and if it's included into the list. But what we want to do is we actually want to apply or add the materials to it. The easiest way to do this is through the going through the model itself, simply because the parts list is actually a representation of the middle material, which is the model itself. To do that, I am just simply going to open up that particular model. So here's the model. Okay. Now the parts that do not have materials are here. So here's the hex head. So if I double click on the hex head, what it does is it highlights the hex head. There's the hex head. With the hex head itself, make sure that that's not synchronous, that's ordered, sorry. Okay, so for the hex head, I want to add the material. So let's open this up, features. Okay, so the hex head has no material applied to it, which is right over here. I'm simply going to double click. It goes into the material. We'll keep it simple. We'll keep it at steel. Click steel. Click yes. And then we're going to hit save. And we're going to come out of part mode into assembly mode. Okay, so now we've added a new material to that. The other hex head, however, does not have material applied to it. Now, an alternate way of adding it in less clutter, highlight, right mouse button, and then it's about half the way down, click open. It will open that up on its own. And what that does is then it allows me to go into the materials on its own and just, again, assign the correct material. So now I'm going to save it. And I'm going to close out of this one. Sorry. So let's close out of this one. And then last but not least, the nut. The nut itself has no material applied to it, so we're going to open that one up also. And we're just going to go double click, and we'll make that steel also. Apply. Yes. Okay. One last save. We'll close that off. Okay, so the database itself has been applied to the individual parts, but it hasn't reconciled itself, or it hasn't recompiled itself for the assembly. So to recompile it simply means just hit save. So we've now hit save. We can go into draft, and when we go into draft, we're going to click OK. And as you can see, there's a border around the assembly as well as the parts list. What that simply means is that it requires an update. So we're going to go up to update views here, or the right mouse button, whichever you prefer, hit. And now it's added all of the materials to the parts list. The other nice thing that it's done is that it's also added correct weights. Okay, so now when we've done this, we can position it to where we want. Let's do a quick fit. And that is pretty much the basis to creating an assembly drawing. We do not put dimensions on assembly drawings, primarily because all of the individual parts themselves will be dimensioned on their own. What we usually do for an assembly drawing is that we use and leave the assembly drawing on its own in order to display all the parts and give us an idea of what the assembly actually looks like when it's fully assembled. Okay, with that said, thank you for listening.